First, I just want to welcome you to Million Roses. Thanks for joining us. And so we have with us, this is Cierra, the founder of Noir N Nola. I'm getting better at saying it. So just start off by, just letting the audience know who you are and, what you have in Noir N Nola.
So my name is Cierra Chenier, and I'm the creator of Noir N Nola, and this is a platform that highlights the history, the politics, lagniappe, and soul of Black New Orleans. And through articles and sharing about history and culture, I aim to preserve the Black New Orleans narrative and be sure that we're at the forefront of telling our own stories.
Definitely. So let's just take it a step back and just tell us what got you interested in even taking that route down,
It's funny because I didn't have an interest in history at all, like in high school or even college, and just because I didn't see myself in it. So, learning about American history, but not seeing anything about New Orleans, not seeing anything about Black people, and, you get those two little paragraphs and that's it. And knowing certain stories, just living here and talking to different family members and just those old New Orleans oral histories, and realizing how important that was, but it wasn't something that I was taught. It kind of made me just want to put these stories at the forefront so that not only it's understood the role that New Orleans plays in American history, but also the role of Black New Orleans especially, and how we have created and cultivated so much and basically built a culture off of it.
Definitely. So in your own personal opinion, how deep is that role that New Orleans has played throughout the country?
It's very crucial, and especially when you think that in the domestic slave trade, New Orleans was once the largest slave port, and that in itself is, when you think about the role slavery has played in U.S. history and the role that New Orleans played in that, you start to understand, this is what our nation's economy was built off of. And then when you start to think about just culture and the amount of Black people who touched the soil in New Orleans through the slave trade, and how they were able to leave their traditions and religions and languages and culture that we see today, and how much that is impacted through music, food, literally everything. And it really is something that is vital to, I'd say, our nation's history.
Definitely. So how important is Noir N Nola for New Orleans, as far as people just knowing about their history and just knowing all that stuff that kind of get misplaced or just left out the history book? So how important is that for New Orleans?
I try to be very intentional in not only sharing the history, but also finding ways to connect it to the present. And that's why I think the work that I do is so important, in that, you got to dig to even find some of these stories. And then when you do find them, you have to also see who told these. So a lot of times in my research, I find that, even the way some of the data and even some of the little history books that do have this information, you see the racist undertones in it. So I might be doing a topic and I have to pull apart so many stereotypes or so many just derogatory words in order to get to the truth.
The true story.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm a Black woman native from New Orleans, and it's not as if I'm trying to talk to somebody, I'm talking with somebody. So it's basically one of our own talking to each other. I try to share these stories in ways that Black New Orleanians talk to one another. I use terms that we say to each other just because I think it's important that you meet people where they are and not force information on them, but also present it in a way where you understand, I see myself in that, and how does this relate to me, and how does this represent me? Because for so long I felt that history and just the story of America in general didn't represent us.
Right. So before Noir N Nola, what did you feel like your purpose was going to be in life, or what did you have planned, in your life already for your future?
I really didn't know. I changed my major in college so many times. I always liked to.
And what college did you attend?
I went to Louisiana State University, so LSU in Baton Rouge.
So how did you feel that going to LSU, a PWI how did that affect your views as far as on like Black history or just the history in New Orleans? Did you feel like they played a good role in teaching you, or how did you?
I'd say that to go to PWI and find, I went into it with the core group of Black girls that I've always been friends with, went into it finding, my niche. So becoming the president of the Black Student Union, becoming the president of the Black Leadership Club, and finding where, I was most comfortable. And thankfully, I found so many professors, and I actually minored in African American Studies. And through that, I just learned so many things that I would not have known otherwise. I'd say that, it was crucial for the Black professors and with the information, because a lot of them was even from New Orleans, and the information that I learned there was vital in, one, keeping me on track, just because, I wasn't worried about my math class or like whatever biology class I had to take. When I was interested and happy to go to class, it was my African American Studies class. Mm-hmm.
And with like, I'm just so happy that your platform is continuing to grow and that it's continuing to evolve, because I definitely feel like it's needed. And not only in New Orleans, but I also feel like, I remember in our last conversation you were telling me like how in the future you plan on expanding, and it may be needed in other inner cities, just as like cities that's similar to New Orleans. But I just kind of want you to just speak on, all right, it's one thing to know about your history, but how could we take that knowledge and turn it into action just to change the current landscape of New Orleans? Mm-hmm. So do you have plans on, doing action work, or is it just feeding out knowledge or information?
So, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there would be no Noir N Nola if there wasn't issues in this city that I believe required action. So it was actually not until, I'm seeing childhood friends or people I've known my whole life not be able to make it due to issues, gun violence, or not being able to afford to live in New Orleans, and just things like that, issues that we battle every day. That's
currently going on.
And it wasn't until, that just hit too close to home. It was like, what can I do with what I know and what I'm good at to at least play my role in this? Because I think we all play separate roles. And, there's people on the front lines, there's people in the streets, there's people that's protesting, there's people making policy, and then there's people like me, and there's creatives, and there's, media people, and I think we all play a vital role that creates like a larger thing for change. And what I'm trying to do with Noir N Nola is that, to me, because we were robbed of so much history, we're not at a starting ground. So in my mind, I see it as, in order to like mobilize people to even like move and do action, you got to be starting at the same place. People need to understand why they need to do this before you tell them, let's go, fight for this issue, let's go do this. You got to understand context before you start mobilizing people and trying to get them in high numbers to act. So I think that with Noir N Nola, as I see it right now for this stage, it's definitely, like you said, pushing out information, giving the history. And when I feel like it's in a place to where it's like, all right, I've and I might always continue to push out like history and try to preserve the culture, but then also, how do we take what we know and what we're given to get people to understand, a major issue right now is gentrification. And some people would say that has nothing to do with history or like slavery or anything like that, but then when you realize that, your people have been here since the city was founded, and that the roads that you were walking on was built by your ancestors, you start to have more of a need to act and say, I should be able to afford to live here. We should be able to practice our culture freely without, noise complaints or, things like that, when you realize what it was built on. So I definitely think this is definitely stage one, and I don't know how long it lasts, but it's definitely something where I want this to be where everybody gets on the same page. And once you know that, then I think you can mobilize and you can act and organize.
Definitely. And I think that's something that's just beautiful, just to kind of envision what it could be. and what it will become one day, because I feel like it'll definitely make a huge impact just on the culture of New Orleans and just the issues. And I just feel like you're not gonna stop until you start to see, until you start to see some change, because you seem pretty steadfast on your vision and what you got going on. So I kind of want you just to dive into, like, what's the number one priority of the number one clear priority of Noir N Nola right now?
I'd say my big thing as of recently has been language, and the way that not only who's telling these stories, but also how they're being told. So yes, I'm a black woman native telling these stories of black New Orleans, but also being intentional about language and how this is being told. I think just us living in society, we're used to things being told a certain way, and I'm starting to, through my personal growth, starting to unlearn a lot of the way these things have been written. So for example, to refer to somebody as a slave versus an enslaved person, that means two different things, and I wouldn't have thought about that otherwise without doing this work. So to say somebody is a slave, that identifies them as a person. Enslaved means like a condition, and just little tidbits like that with language and coded language, you start to realize like how subconsciously we take these things. So if you're being referred to as this all throughout history, you don't think of it as this condition that was placed upon somebody. You think they were this, and they were always this. And I think it's very important to, and for another thing, if you read anything I've ever written, I capitalize the being black always, and that's always intentional. It's just things like that. I'm trying to be very intentional about how I say certain things, and kind of like, while in the process of me also unlearning, having my readers unlearn these things as well, because I do think the way this information has been presented to us historically has been in ways that dehumanizes us.
Definitely. And I want to take a because you talking about the actually reading the articles. So I noticed you post content on social media that may capture the audience, but can you speak on the importance of actually clicking a link to go read the entire article just to get the full in-depth of what you're talking about?
So when you think about media in general, how many times have we seen like those clickbait headlines where you say, oh my God, but like nobody reads the article, and it turns out if you read it, it didn't even mean that at all, and it was more to get your attention, or to spread, I guess, like a propaganda or something, not necessarily for you to get the truth. And I think it speaks to that. It's, yes, the caption or the little 2 sentences or the 140 characters that Twitter lets me post is important, but I think to get the full grasp of everything, you need to read the articles to understand everything in context. Like, yeah, I'm going to share the thing that catches your eye, but to understand it in full and in context, because remember, these are stories, these are people's lives, these people lived, died, and went through all of these events or oppressions and just everything. And not only do I think we owe it to their stories to sit down and read something for 3 minutes, but also to better understand it. You know, you might get one thing out of that caption, you don't remember it, but in taking the time to read an entire article, there's so many things in that you could pull that might resonate with you. So I think it's important to, and also in doing these articles, I do want to, get people reading. Like, it's much easier to read articles sometimes than it is to sit down and read a whole book. We always rushing, and a lot of people don't have time to sit down and do that. So I try to present it in a way where it's like it's something you actually want to sit down and read, and in reading it one time, you'll understand why you need the full context in order to truly get something from it.
Definitely. And I could vouch for her when I say if you actually take the time out to read the articles, it'll actually give you a different type of insight on certain topics or certain things that you never even knew about, or you just thought didn't have any significance to it. It could just be like something you might be writing about a street that people may pass by every day, but you didn't know how significant that street is to our culture, our ancestors. But So I feel like everybody should definitely don't only look at the social media post, the Instagram post, but actually click the link and take the time out to read. No matter if it's just one a week or just every so often, but I definitely think it's something that everybody needs to read. And would you mind telling us what piece of information was the most interesting piece of information that you've come across since you've been doing Noir N Nola?
I'd say very early on, and really this kind of set the tone for a lot of my work. It would be the story of Marie Laveau, just because it was a name that has been mentioned in pop culture and movies and myth and horror film, things like that, and we've heard it 1,000 times, but I never really knew who she was. I knew this was a black woman in New Orleans and she did voodoo, and that was about it. And in really diving in her story and feeling compelled to tell her story, I think, and very early on, it was one of the first articles I did, and in learning that, it kind of set the basis for everything following, and really I would say help with the foundation of Noir N Nola to begin with, just because in knowing that a black woman in the 19th century being an entrepreneur, finessing the system to where it was illegal for her to practice these African religions, but she still did it and covered it up with Catholicism, and fixing gumbo and bringing it to prisoners on death row, and just knowing that this name that has basically just been spread all over and had all kind of things associated with it, you never got to really understand the true woman, the true entrepreneur, the true really figure that she was. And especially in that being a black woman, it really resonated with me, and I've said on different projects before that New Orleans is a black woman. I do think the spirit of the city is that, and a lot of that formed with me learning the story of Marie Laveau.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. So all of this history that you're taking, and all of this newfound information and knowledge that you're taking, and to say that you were someone at one point that wasn't even interested in history, how do you feel this has changed you as a person? I can't look at anything without thinking of it through a historical lens. Any issue now, I start to in knowing all of this background, I can't look at any issue that we see happening in the city without relating it to something way, way further back. Because in understanding these things, you start to see how connected everything is, and it's never one thing that just stands alone. When you understand the history, you see kind of how we got here, and you really even get even more so adamant about changing something, knowing what something used to be or how we got to this place. When I think about what is now history is pre-Katrina New Orleans, so seeing the city change in so many ways that aren't beneficial to people from here, you start to think of these things of well, I knew what it was and I know what it could be, so how do we either get back to certain things, or how do we adapt to certain things. So what steps do you think the post-Katrina generation can take to change this city for the better?
I think that in a time where I know that it was reported that we had the lowest murder rate of last year, but I always am gonna feel one is too many. It's still high, and I think with that being a reoccurring issue that we've always had, what I'm trying to do with telling the history and preserving culture is getting us to understand the value in ourselves, not somebody else telling us, not us looking to other things or other people to say oh, I want to be like this, or I need this, but more of look at what you've been through and look what's in you and look what we've already done, and taking that in and seeing the value in your own life of what you could do, and understanding what your ancestors accomplished really out of nothing and under much harsher conditions than I would say that we're in now, and that being a testimony to been there, done that, it's in you already. It's been in your city, it's been in your blood, and it's been in your people. So really just trying to get people to understand, if you know your history, you know yourself, and seeing that value that I think we lost a long time ago. I think a lot of things with crime now, murder now, I don't care if I live or die, and I don't care if you live or die. I'm not looking at you as like an equal. I'm not seeing value in your life or mine, because at the end of the day, I might go to jail, or I'm taking your life. That I think we lost the sanctity of our lives. I think we lost seeing value in our lives, and I think all of that stems from somebody telling us who we were versus us knowing what was always there.
Definitely. So what's some advice you have for up and coming people, or people that's already situated that also wants to preserve New Orleans culture and take that and build a better New Orleans? So what's some advice you have for those people?
I say stand on the truth. I think it's so easy to, we talked earlier about content, I think it's so easy to get stuck on what does numbers, or like what goes viral, or like what you get the most engagement on. And yes, it's important to reach people, but not losing sight of how you're reaching them, and not watering down your content, standing on what you started it for, and being adamant and telling the truth, and having not only your best interest at heart, but also like the betterment of the city. I think it's easy to look at things as like a me, and I think that's historically just been our problem of like, I'm gonna get me and my people on, and we gonna elevate, and then that's it, and there's no pipeline. So I'd say, in telling your truth and pushing out your content and building your business and your team, looking even further and saying, how can this be a pipeline, and how can I not only leave a legacy, but leave something to where people can hold on to that, and you're creating something that is a pipeline for the city, for people that look like you.
More people,
right.
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to, just thank you for joining the show. Like I said, I'm gonna keep saying, like, I think what you got going on is gonna be something major for the city. It already is major for the city, and just the impact, because right now it's like it's a part of the culture of the post-Katrina generation. It's a part of the culture, and it's already making a major impact on people. Just like I seen the young woman Jay, who just did the whole photo exhibit just based off of something she read, based off of reading one of your articles. And I think that's just pretty impressive, just to know that you got people just following what you're doing and looking up to you, because it's playing a significant role in what's going on. It's only going to continue to grow. So I just want to thank you for doing what you're doing. And is there anything else you would like to add on, or anything else you would like to say?
Just that we are in Black History Month, but Black History is something that we are supposed to share year round, and that is what I aim to do with Noir N Nola, just sharing these Black New Orleans stories year round, to where we don't feel like we're reduced to just a month, but this is a month where we can celebrate. So remembering to, follow the page, read the articles, and taking in these stories as you can, and letting them resonate with you.
Definitely. So y'all heard it, like, just keep doing what we have to do just to make New Orleans a better New Orleans. I promise you won't be disappointed by following Noir N Nola page. We're gonna tag all the information somewhere on here. And just thank y'all for tuning in. Again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And we hope y'all enjoyed the episode.